Haskamp, and I have a bunch of wonderful colleagues today to join us for this remote NRS testing options webinar. Please note that everyone is currently muted to reduce background noise. If you're having any technical issues, please chat with Astrid. We also want to let you know that the recording, slides, and handouts will be posted on the MN ABE website. In addition, we know that there are some that couldn't join us today. We will be recording today's session, and that session recording will be in MN ABE under State ABE presentations. So as we start our remote NRS testing options webinar, we have 90 minutes, and joining me today, we'll have a couple others from our state assessment team and Astrid from the State Department of Education. So let's kick off with some introductions. My name is Brad Haskamp, and I'm the Adult Secondary Credential and Education Policy Specialist here at the Minnesota Department of Education. Nice to virtually see you today. Let's turn it over to Linda, or Marty, I'm sorry, Marty.
Okay, I'm Marty Olson. I am State Assessment Trainer for CASAS and TABE, as well as the coordinator for Southwest ABE South, based out of Worthington in southern Minnesota.
Excellent, thank you, Marty. And how about Linda?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Linda Keller. I work with Metro North ABE, and I am also a CASAS and TABE trainer. And thanks again for joining us, and feel free to share the webinar chat with colleagues who weren't able to attend later too. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. And Astrid.
Yes, good morning, everybody. This is Astrid Leiden. I work with Brad at the Minnesota Department of Education, and I'm the Professional Development Specialist. Really glad to have you here all today.
And we'd like to have a chance to make sure everyone else can introduce themselves in the chat. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your program, anything else you'd like to share today. Good to hear from some of you like Linda Uskala and Laura Malad. Good to see both of you and hear from both of you as well. Astrid, do you want to take over?
Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide, Brad. So we're going to start the webinar just with some general announcements and an overview of the remote testing situation currently in Minnesota. Then we'll move to some more details about CASAS remote testing that Marty is going to take us through. We'll pause after her slides to take any questions and give you the opportunity to get clarification on any questions you may have. Then we'll turn things over to Linda to explore TABE remote testing. Again, we'll take some time after her presentation to answer your questions. And then at the end, we're going to have some time for discussion and questions with everyone who's with us today, thinking about what are your decision points currently around the move to remote testing. And we'll hear what people are thinking about in different programs and answer any additional questions that you have. So Brad, let's go to the next slide. First, we want to just start by defining some terms. So what do we mean by remote testing? Remote testing means that the student is taking their test in a location that is different from the test proctor. So when we're talking about our NRS assessments, this involves a more secure situation where the student is taking the test on a computer or other approved device while being monitored by the proctor using one of several approved live video methods. Why are we doing this? So I think the reasons are pretty clear right now. We've had a very quick shift to providing instruction purely at a distance, and we've not been able to pre or post test our students. So remote testing is going to allow us to continue serving our students at a distance while getting those tests. As we'll talk about in a minute, we have lifted the requirement to test before 12 hours, but we're still at a disadvantage when we're not able to conduct those tests because they provide very important information for placement and instructional purposes. So the approval of remote testing is going to allow us to get that data from our students and serve them as best as we can. But we also want to be looking toward the future. There have been some silver linings in this situation where we have had to learn rapidly how to do things that we may not have done before. And what we learn now around remote testing will allow us to continue this practice beyond the current pandemic and school closures. We know that we have students that, for a variety of reasons, may have challenges getting into our centers and programs, that students we may be serving entirely at a distance, or who may have other challenges for coming in. So with this change to allowing remote testing, this will allow us to continue serving a greater array of students. So hopefully you all saw the statement that came out of our office yesterday that came from Sherry Eichinger announcing the approval of remote testing by our office. Remote testing of using NRS assessments has been approved as long as it adheres to the requirements set by the test vendors and the U.S. Department of Education. And Marty and Linda are going to go through the details of what those requirements are here today. In a general sense, the remote testing requirements fall into three broad categories. First of all, to be able to conduct remote testing, proctors need to be able to verify the student's identity. Proctors also need to make sure that they are following all of the publisher guidelines to ensure that those test questions remain secure. And then finally, proctors need to have been trained. So they need to complete training by the publisher on the specifics of how to conduct that remote testing. So Brad is going to talk through the three different tests that have been approved for remote testing currently.
Thanks, Astrid. And yes, I'm going to give a brief overview of the three assessments that we've approved. First is Best Plus. Best Plus is one of our approved NRS assessments, and remote testing is available with training. Linda Keller is one of our state assessment trainers. She's also with Metro North Adult Basic Education. And you can contact her if you have more information about how to do Best Plus remote testing. This is an ESL-based test. It's always been a computer-based test, one-to-one. And for this reason, because it's been a one-to-one test in the past, it has not been used by many programs around the state. In fact, Metro North has been our main user for this assessment. And so if you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out to Linda Keller. Her email address is on the screen. And we won't be talking any more about Best Plus today, but we encourage you to talk with Linda Keller if you have more questions about Best Plus. However, we do have a lot more people around the state that have been using CASAS. And CASAS is now available you can do remote e-testing, that is computer-based testing via Zoom or GoToMeeting. And that's available to programs that are already doing computer-based CASAS testing. And please note that the students can use either their Chromebooks, iPads, or a Windows 10 PC. Right now, we do have one program that is currently using it, Metro South in Bloomington, and we're going to hear a little bit from Marilyn later on in the session. And finally, TABE 1112 is also available for remote testing. And so the computer-based TABE 1112 is available in web conferencing tools utilizing their DRC Insight. Note that you do have to have or create a DRC Insight account in order to use the TABE 1112. And you can also provide the TABE locator. So unlike the TABE 1112, which you would have to pay for each test administration, during this time, DRC, which owns and publishes the TABE test, they have made their TABE locator available for free. And that TABE locator, again, can tell you which assessment in the 1112 series that student should take. And so that is a great piece of help for some programs around the state as well. Note that training by DRC started already in April for this remote proctoring service. And they do have quite a bit of guidance on remote proctoring requirements on their website. We encourage you to keep track of their website, tabetest.com, for updated guidance. But we have some of their current guidance available in the materials tab. One of the entities that's exploring it, again, is Metro North, Linda Keller at Metro North and Anoka Hennepin. They have been exploring this, the TABE remote testing option. And so we also, in regards to this, we want to make sure that you also remember that we have lifted the 12-hour restriction in SID for new students with no pretest during the school closure period. To do that, you enter the COVID EFL exception option in the Students Assessment tab. Don't write that in as a self-made assessment or as your local program assessment. This is an official test option right now and in the Students Assessment tab. And then you could enter 12+ hours. The reason we're sharing this right now is to let you know you have a little bit of breathing room in order to implement this testing. Not saying that you should be doing nothing, but just know that you have a little bit of breathing room right now in terms of remote testing. And note that any students with 12+ hours without a valid pretest that are part of this lifted restriction, those hours will count for state AB funding, but they maybe won't count for federal AB funding. And we did send a memo about this on April 29th. And it's helpful to know that this exemption will last when either in-person ABE testing can resume and or remote testing options are approved and available for ABE programs and students around the state. And once we say that we're going to stop lifting this restriction, we are going to give programs a 1-month notice before reinstating the restriction. That way you have some time to catch up and get any students that you need to tested, etc. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Marty Olson to talk through some of our CASAS information and details. Marty.
Thanks, Brad. So I'm going to talk about the CASAS remote testing. And just to remind you, this is an overview. This is not a Proctor training. You're not all going to be experts by the time we're done with this webinar today. But we do want you to know more about remote training, testing, and learn what it is you would need to do if you want to become a remote testing site. Up on the screen right now, you can see the CASAS.org homepage, and you might notice under what's new, it says remote testing, and you can learn a lot about CASAS remote testing and a lot of the documents that some are in the materials today, but you can learn more about remote testing from the CASAS website. Next slide, please. Okay, so Astrid went over some of these benefits, but we'll just review. Certainly, continuation of services is a big thing. If you've got some people who are, you were going to test them in March, just before we were told, nope, you can't have class anymore. So maybe you can get a post-test and they might be ready to earn that measurable skill gain. And then I know many programs have started enrolling new students, and yet how do you know where to put them? People have figured out a way, but if you could remote test them, then you would get that baseline score for NRS reporting, and it would be easier to place them in the class that's best for them. And I think one of the biggest things that we really want to consider is that we are developing capacity to test our distance learners who can't get in to test. People that want to work with us want to do some sort of distance learning program, but they just can't come in to us. So if we can build our capacity and learn how to do this, then we should be able to serve more learners. Next slide, please. However, you'll note there are definitely some challenges. Number one is the technology. Our proctors and our students have to have appropriate devices. And I will say right now, smartphones are too small. I know that many of our learners have been working with teachers on smartphones, and that's great. But as far as testing, that is not possible. So they need to have something else that's going to be larger, basically, and available to the student to do the testing. Internet bandwidth can be a problem. Right now, especially with distance learning, there's a lot of competition within the households. And so, you know, doing a test, we don't want to have breaks in that connection. Student environment is another big issue. Can the student have privacy, or are they going to have kids and cats running through their testing space? So it needs to be a quiet place without distractions. Look at where you're sitting right now. So many of us have had to suddenly set up home offices, and that would be the same with our students. Where are they going to test that's going to be a good place for them to focus on the test? Certainly for all of us, the new procedures to learn. There's multi-step processes for both the proctor and the students. So all of us need to learn these new things before we're going to be ready to do the remote testing. Proctors need to be trained. There is certainly a question with test security. We need to maintain that. And all of these things lead then to equity concerns, because as you look at this list, you're going to say, my students would have some difficulty with this remote testing. So let's go on to the next slide, Brad. So who can do remote testing? During the pilot phase, they were asking only programs that had already implemented e-tests to practice the remote testing. However, that pilot phase is coming to an end. So if you're a site that would like to do some remote testing or think you would like to, the first thing you have to do is become an e-testing program. So there is a going live checklist. I'll talk about that in a minute, but there is a list of things that you need to do before you'd be able to implement remote testing. Go to the next slide, please. So remote testing is only for e-test. I guess maybe we didn't mention that, and I just need to say that. You can't do paper pencil tests via remote testing. So this is only the e-tests that you can use. So you have to be currently using e-tests to do this, follow this list. If you are currently using e-tests, you have to follow the Going Remote checklist, and I think there's a link to that in the materials. You have to read the remote testing guidelines. That is a 15-page document, and you need to read it all. You need to pay attention to what they're telling you to do. You need to be prepared to follow all of the guidelines in that document. You need to complete an agency remote agreement and send that to CASAS so that they can approve you for remote testing. And then proctors need to be trained, and they have to complete a remote testing agreement. Now, currently, there aren't any proctor training scheduled, but CASAS is working on getting that up onto the website. So if you want to start this process, you can certainly read through the testing guidelines and get yourself prepared. Next slide, please. So if you decide, I think this is a great idea, and I would like to do e-testing and eventually remote testing, here's the list of things that you need to do. This is in the Going Live checklist. So first of all, you need to make sure you've got the system requirements to do online testing, and that you would check with CASAS and work that out, and that information is in the Going Live checklist. Then you have to do the following trainings. You see that list. Implementation basics, most of you probably have gone through that if you've been in a testing already. Then you need to do the e-tests online Proctor certification. That's a training on the CASAS website, as well as the online coordinator certification. Both of those are on the CASAS website. Then you need to sign an implementation agreement for e-tests with CASAS. You need to set up your online account and order your tests. CASAS does have 100 WTUs minimum purchase that's required in order to get started with e-tests. Next slide, please. Okay, so once you're all set up and you're ready to become a remote testing program, then you need to take a look at what is the technology that's required. For the Proctor, and now remember, this is the Proctor at home generally, where, they may be, if it's possible to go into your site, then probably a lot of these things would be available. But if not, the Proctor has to have this at home. PC with Windows 10 or a Mac with Windows 10, a webcam, microphone and speakers, and then probably the one that, again, we go back to internet speed, reliable internet speed. And CASAS does have links to some free speed tests that you can check your browser so that you can ensure that your speed from the computer that you're going to be administering this test has the speed that's necessary. Next slide, please. And then for the student, and again, this is where some of our questions might come in, because there is technology required for the student to provide. So they need to have a Windows 10 laptop, desktop, or tablet computer. It could be a Mac desktop or a laptop or an iPad. So there's a lot of options for them, but they need to meet the minimum requirements. They need to have a webcam, microphone and speakers, and then again, that reliable internet speed. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are talking today, what I'm focusing on really right now is the one-to-one testing. There are other options, and we'll share those with you a little bit later, but to begin with, for remote testing, we're recommending, and CASAS recommends, that you start with the one-to-one. And we're going to have Marilyn Dvorak talk to us a little bit about what she's been doing, and she'll tell you her experiences as well. And I believe she started with the one-on-one as well. So remote testing, you need to have some sort of a web conferencing program. These are just some examples. If there are others, CASAS is willing to let you try them and see if they work. Zoom is one that I would say, 90% of us probably or more are aware of this one and have been using this one. The point with the one-on-one that we're talking about right now is that you need screen sharing and you need remote control, because the student is actually taking the test on the proctor's computer. So the proctor has shared the screen with the student, and then they take remote control to do the test. The proctor needs a paid version of Zoom, or you're all aware that Zoom has a limit to the number of minutes. However, they've lifted that right now, but that won't be forever. So you do need a paid version to ensure that you've got long enough sessions. And the computer has to install the app on their computer as well. Some others that have been worked with, WebEx, GoToMeeting. Google Meet is another one that's been tried. Marilyn might be able to tell you more about that. She struggled with that one because of the add-ons that were necessary to be added on to the student computer. Next slide, please. So what are you going to do? Once you've checked all of this hardware, you make sure that you've got the appropriate software. Now you're thinking, okay, I want to test. Before a proctor would ever schedule a test, they should practice with, and they should do it with a colleague so they know what they're saying. They practice. I got to practice as I took part of the student, and Marilyn was showing me, okay, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to click on, and that sort of thing. She learned a lot about what the student might not know. So there's a script, there's instructions, and there's a script that you can follow along. And again, that link is here in the PowerPoint. So prior to testing day, you need to practice and be comfortable with the process. Next slide, please. Then we get to possibly testing day, or it might be the day before testing day. You need to, there's a quick reference for remote testing that you can follow, but basically the proctor needs to meet with the tester before we're ready to test, and at that point they're going to confirm the technical requirements on the computer, go over the procedures, answer any questions, and they need to check the test taker's identification. At this point, they're going to do it again, but you need to do it in this pre-meeting. You also need to check the test taker's environment. Do they have a spot that's going to work? Do they have a door that they can close? If they don't, are there going to be people around? So the idea being we want to make this as close to the appropriate test taking situation as we can. Remember, this is a standardized test. And then once you're comfortable with all of that, then you're going to familiarize the test taker with the test environment using sample test items for them to practice on. Next slide, please. So we've gotten the practice done, and then there's a break. You could either do this earlier in the day and then come back to do the test, or you could do the previous slide the day before. Then on testing day, again, you're going to verify the test taker's identification. You're going to verify the test taker's surroundings, ensure that there isn't anything, a telephone, a computer, other people, all of those need to be removed from the test taker's surroundings. Then you're going to set up the test. As I said, what we're talking about right now is the one-to-one with remote sharing. There are other ways, and we'll look at those. CASAS has also said you can do up to 5 students at a time, again via remote, but that would be a little bit different. You're not sharing your screen. Then you have to set up the test on the tester's computer. But they've said no more than 5 can be done at one time. So one proctor with 5 students is the limit. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a summary of the other options. So if you look at the top in the blue, number 1 is really the option that we talked about. But there are other options that CASAS has made available. And if you are interested in learning more, they actually did a very good webinar 2 days ago on the 13th. So if you go to the CASAS.org website and you click on their social media newsroom, you'll see over on the left-hand side webinars. And there was a webinar that was done on the 13th. I think it was called CASAS National Remote Training Webinar, so it's pretty obvious it's the one you want. And they go over all of the options very succinctly, and if this is an option that you're thinking you want to look into, check out their webinars series. Next slide, please. Yes?
Hey, Marty, could you
Yes.
remind us get to that page on the CASAS website again, to their recent webinar?
Okay.
And I just put the link in the chat for folks.
Okay, so you're going to get the link, Astrid?
Yeah, it's
Or-
in the chat, so people can
Okay,
use that.
all right. And it
The
is, if you go to the CASAS.org website, and on the right-hand side at the top, you'll see social media newsroom. If you click on that, then over on the left-hand side on the next screen, you're going to see a list, and in that list is webinars. Click on the webinars, and right now the first one that you'll see is the one I'm talking about from Wednesday that talked about, it goes over all of these remote options. They do a really nice job of explaining which are the options, what you can use, when you can use, what you can use. Because if you look at this this slide, there's a lot of information on it. And that's more in depth than we're going to go today. Any
Thanks.
other questions?
Yeah, we did have a question in here. And then we're going to call on Marilyn next. But one of the questions we had in our chat was from Tad in Roseville. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, Tad did have a question that Marty or that Linda gave an answer to. But Marty, if you want to add, Tad was asking when the pilot phase with CASAS remote testing was going to end.
Good question. It's kind of been ongoing, and they said mid to late May they were going to complete their pilot phase, although I think they're continuing to have people share what they're learning. If you are a program that thinks, I'd like to start this, go ahead and get started now, because that list of things that you need to do is pretty long, and it's going to take you more than 2 or 3 weeks to get through that and get all set up and ready to go. So although the pilot phase is kind of winding down, they haven't said it's done, but by the time you're ready to go, they will be ready to accept new participants.
Excellent. And Linda Uskala asked that she read yesterday that WhatsApp will start a video conferencing with up to 50 people at a time. She recognizes that many isn't necessary here, but is there any word whether WhatsApp video would be usable for CASAS remote testing in the future?
I don't know anything about WhatsApp, so I can't answer that question, but if you contact CASAS, they have a specific link. I believe it's remote testing at casas.org. I can look that up. But you could ask that question, because they're the ones who are going through, they're having actually different programs try these things and see if all the requirements are in that app.
Excellent. And I'll go through the rest of the questions, and then I'm going to give Marty or Marilyn a chance to kind of share her experience. C gives us a good reminder. C from Southwest says, this is a perfect time to ask a favor from your local Minnesota State College or University about letting you have access to their systems through by having a STAR ID. If you are able to get a STAR ID, you could have access to Zoom, to their version of Zoom or their Zoom account. They have a really nice version within MnSCU, or the Minnesota State College and University system. And Kirsten says that, she is wondering, if you have a CASAS e-test online account, can you administer any CASAS test or only the new CASAS goals test?
Okay.
And for example, she's wondering, what about testing ESL students using maybe CASAS Life and Work?
Yes, any tests that are currently approved by the NRS can be given via CASAS e-test. So yes, the Life and Work reading, the Life and Work listening, as well as CASAS goals, reading, and math are all available to be used in the e-test, and therefore that you can do that via remote.
Excellent. Okay, final comment, and then I'm going to move to Marilyn. actually Caroline over in Cambridge Asante, she does have a Minnesota State College Star ID with their college system there. And she, though, her personal experience has been a little different. Her account is considered a different category than faculty, staff, or student. And unfortunately, with the category that Caroline was given, she does not have access to Zoom. So that's something good to consider when you approach your college or university.
Yes.
Okay. Let's turn it over to, or let's have Marilyn from Metro South maybe share a little bit about her experience in trying out CASAS remote testing. Marilyn. Marilyn? Oh, it looks like we have you muted. There.
Okay, there we go. Okay, another remote lesson I learned. Yes, I did. I actually tested a student yesterday morning after many, many practice sessions with coworkers. My biggest takeaway from doing this remote testing is know the platform you're going to use. I started out using Google Meet because our district, that's their thing. I learned that there's no remote sharing or remote control of a desktop without an add-on. And that's just, step 11 and 12 of steps that students already have to take. So I abandoned that and used Zoom, and Zoom worked fairly well. I'm still not real confident about it because I haven't used it. So that would be know the platform you're going to use and how it works. Just because, these little things pop up and then your student doesn't know it either, probably. The testing, once we got to the testing, because we do remote testing, that went very well. I kind of handpicked a student with teacher input, and she was very motivated to take the test. And once we got started, you can see her moving through the test. You can see her, you keep their video up so you see them. And I really paid attention to what they were doing because you have to trust them to a certain extent. They show you the room, they tell you no one's there, they show you their desktop, but really you can't see the whole room after that. So you just watch the student and, if they're doing something that seems a little odd, like maybe looking down a lot for a long time instead of at the screen. I mean, there's little cues, I think, that would make you ask them what they're doing maybe. But I found that it's very interesting to watch a student take a test when they get to a hard question because they get a look on their face like they're really concentrating. But that's kind of beside the point. I would recommend Zoom. I didn't try GoToMeeting. I think one of the people from another state at the CASAS webinar said that they tried that and that didn't work very well either. The downfall is you should use Zoom Pro, like Marty said, because otherwise you're time limited. And yesterday it took us from 9:30 to noon to get all this stuff done with the student, but they did take the whole time to take the test. So they took the 75 minutes. So I don't know. I'm excited about doing this and really wondering how we're going to do more than one student at a time. The Chromebooks is a two-step thing because the Chromebook you have to go through a kiosk, and with the kiosk you can't use the camera on the Chromebook. So now you're using a student phone. So I'm hoping they come up with a little bit different way to do some of this stuff because, again, you're asking your student to use their phone. And they have very good tools out there. They're very thorough if you read their guidelines. I'm kind of tweaking it a little bit because I found that the more you share with the student to begin with in the email that you send about what they need to have, what's going to happen, you have to have Zoom, but then and do the speed test. And then I'm going to ask them to email me back and say, okay, I did this. Here's my speed. I have Zoom now. And, just kind of get them prepared for the things because I think my student struggled a little bit with getting to the Zoom meeting. But otherwise, I think it went very well. I'm very excited about this. And I love online testing. I don't like shuffling books and papers around. So this way I just have to keep track of a Chromebook or a laptop. Anyway, that's my experience. Does anyone have any questions?
Not seeing any questions coming in yet, Marilyn. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with testing. It really helps to have someone with direct experience talk through what their experience was like.
Well, and I think that if you're wondering what the questions are like, you can go to the website, and I would recommend just go ahead and creating an account so you can log into the CASAS website, and then they have sample tests, sample e-tests. So, and anyone can go there and try them. So you can see what they look like, kind of how they're set up. And it's good for a student to do it too if they haven't done one, because it helps with the navigation through the test too.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So we have a couple of suggestions and comments coming in through the chat. First is just a practical one about Zoom. Jenny says that Zoom is offering to lift the 40-minute time limit to schools. I think the intent is K-12 schools, but she applied on behalf of her program, which is a community-based organization, and they lifted the time limit for free for all accounts and that have emails within their domain. So that's something you could explore. Then we also had a suggestion coming from Teresa, just thinking about how to make this work in a smaller consortium. She wondered whether there would perhaps be a way to have some testing experts who could test potential students and then share the testing information with the consortium who will be servicing the student. And Kirsten said that she's thinking about that as well, potentially having just one person in their consortium trained to do the testing rather than trying to get a multitude of people trained. I think we would also want to explore using a regional approach, perhaps. So this hasn't been explored yet. I can say that we can work with the state training team to think about what that might look like. So if you have additional thoughts, please share those in the chat or contact us with your ideas, and we'll be exploring that idea.
Astrid,
Yes.
I read on, I don't remember now because it's been before this COVID thing started, but I think if as a state we have a site, then we can share all the testing information with each other, kind of like Sid does now.
Okay.
Because right now, and I didn't get a chance to pursue it because other things came up, but I would think that if as a state we use CASAS e-tests, somehow we could set it up like Sid, where we could just share the student test data. I don't know if California does that, but if you're going to talk to CASAS or investigate it at all, just ask about that. If within a state we can somehow share test information, because right now if a student tests on goals from another site, I have to put in the score in the CASAS e-test. Otherwise, it pretty much makes them take a locator and the same test that they already took at another site. So we just have to be very aware of that, but it's not that huge of a deal.
Okay, that's good to know.
Share info, it would be good, really good. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing. Marty, any final thoughts on that topic or anything else before we move to our TABE discussion?
No, I think there's some really good things to think about. Certainly coming from a program where I have a lot of one-room schoolhouses, I like the idea of having an expert who could do some of this testing. So definitely, I think that's something we need to look into.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Marty. And then
Thank
we
you.
will have some time at the end of the webinar to take any other questions that come to mind around CASAS. Let's transition now to TABE, and we'll turn things over to Linda Keller to share what we know now about remote testing of TABE.
Hi again, everybody. It's Linda. The slide that you're looking at now is the landing page for tabetest.com. Tabetest.com is where you are going to find all of your resources to do with anything TABE, including now all of the new information contained with regard to remote proctoring. The visuals that you are seeing right now are the new document uploads with regard to remote proctoring, and there are 4 different documents. There are 2 that are student documents, and there are 2 that are examiner documents. There's also information about phase 1 and phase 2 of where they are in the stages of providing information with remote proctoring. Next slide. And as both Astrid and Marty had stated earlier, there are a lot of benefits to remote testing for both TABE and for CASAS and for Minnesota as well as the entire US because of the funding sources that we get from the federal government and the requirement to provide NRS testing. Remote testing can allow us to provide continuation of services as we're providing instruction remotely to our learners. As Marty stated earlier, there's the possibility to be able to post-test learners who weren't able to post-test prior to COVID closures. But then there's also providing us the capability to pre-test new students who want to enroll in our programming since COVID. And to be able to understand what their needs are, where their skill sets are, so that we can accurately place them into our programming with the tools that we have with the NRS testing. And then I've discussed this with many of our instructors and staff locally, but with having the capability now to remote test learners in adult basic ed, this is opening a lot of new doors for us to be able to serve students. As many of you know, and since many of us have been in ABE for many years, we know that the reasons that learners are leaving us have to do with job schedules and not being able to get to classes when they are being offered, but this opens up different opportunities to allow for instruction remotely as well. Next slide, please. However, with remote testing, we also need to take into consideration all of the challenges that are posted with that. And with TABE, I do want people to include in the chat. I know that there was a survey done by MDE earlier this spring to understand how many agencies and programs have already had access and created accounts with online testing, but can people type in the chat box and include which program you are from and if you already have a DRC account created prior COVID? I know that DOC has accounts. I know that Jessica Turner in Brainerd had an online account. Metro North does and has had an online testing account for a year and a half, as well as Minneapolis. So with TABE, DRC has provided the locator unlocked. However, in order to get access to the locator or any TABE testing now, you do need to create an online account with TABE. The minimum order that has to be placed in order to open an online testing account is for 500 test administrations, and the cost per test, if you purchase between 135 and 1,500 tests, each subtest is going to cost $3.70. So a minimum order of 1,850 is going to be required in order for you to get an account established. There have been questions, and that question was asked directly to DRC. If programs had local scanning set up prior to COVID, which meant that they were using the TABE scannable answer documents in order to get diagnostic results back, unfortunately, those programs do not have access to TABE tests. or the free locator at this time. But if you don't, and your program is interested in creating an account, you do need to contact the DRC Order Management Department to place an order. That Shelf Customer Service, there's an 800 number here. There is a fax number here, and you can also email them at shelfcustomerservice at datarecognition.com. If by chance your agency wanted to purchase up to 30,000 plus tests for online testing with DRC, it would drop the cost to $2.40 per test. So don't know anybody that has that kind of volume here in Minnesota for testing, possibly DOC, but something to consider. So next slide, please. There are a lot of challenges, as Marty and Aster both elaborated on earlier too, with remote testing. Both the proctor and the student do need access to technology. I do have to thank Hubs for information that they presented in the remote registration webinar that was provided several weeks back, but they gave programs ideas on developing new processes for registration for new learners enrolling in our program. And we did use the template at Metro North that Hub had designed, and then we elaborated on it even more. So when we have a learner that contacts our site and fills out an online interest form, our first step now is sending a link to our tech Google form to find out what individuals have access to. And as Marty stated earlier, with remote testing, individuals need to be able to have access to desktop, PC, or some technology. Smartphones are not designed, the graphics are too small in order to display test items clearly. And then what also needs to be considered is the internet bandwidth for other users in the house. Some of us are fortunate and may only have 1 or 2 adults working in the house using the bandwidth, but many of us have children and multiple children working in the house as well as working on online coursework. So the more users in the house, more people are taking up that bandwidth. And as Marty stated earlier, remote testing in a home may lack privacy. Do individuals have a private space that they can go into to take a test so that they are uninterrupted? Do they have access to that? And then something that local programs need to consider is what new processes and procedures do they need to learn in order to implement all of these different multi-step processes that need to happen for both proctors and students, because there is a lot more upfront work enrolling people in our programming, as I'm sure that many of you have found over the course of the last several weeks. And then proctors that are going to be doing remote testing also need to have remote test training. Many of the same items need to be taken into consideration with confidentiality, but TABE is a standardized test, and all of those same test protocols need to be followed according to the publisher's guidelines, including test security. So, there's a lot of other things to consider that are challenges as well. The next slide, please. So who can do remote testing? If your program already has an active TABE online account created with DRC, then you are good to go. If you already have staff who have been certified to administer TABE in Minnesota ABE within the last 5 years, that is a bonus. If you have staff who have already completed the remote proctor training that is available on tabetest.com, that is a first step. If you already do have a TABE online account created, there are additional steps that are required when the account is created. to add staff. The Insight platform, the online DRC platform, is very similar to SID, where users need to be added, staff need to be added, and students' records do need to be created too. So in order for a test administrator to have access, whoever is the point of contact in your agency that created the account and worked with DRC to get the account opened, they're the individual that needs to be able to put in the staff who needs access to create test sessions and to create student records in there as well. So next slide, please. So the system requirements for test administrators. A test administrator can access the online DRC account from any common web browser. Access to the remote locator test, however, requires Google Chrome, as does the TABE individual subject testing, reading, math, and language. A student will need to have access to Google Chrome on the device that they're using. Once that test administrator account is opened, the point of contact that created the test administrator account needs to make sure that they allow access to the locator test to that test administrator, so that they have all of the same permissions and they can see all of the information that they need to do in order to do the test remotely. So the way that I look at that, or to kind of get a visual on that, is very similar to if you are the point person and you are creating SID records in your program. There is admin level, there is teacher level, there is view only level in SID. That is very similar in the DRC Insight online testing portal. So next slide, please. Okay, so with the TABE remote locator testing, which DRC is currently allowing to be given remotely and unproctored, they did share on their site, and this is on tabetest.com, that it is temporarily available per DRC. I imagine until until something changes with COVID, that's going to continue happening, but it's always best to check the tabetest.com site to verify that. For the TABE remote locator, in order to work, a student needs a computer. They can have either a desktop or a laptop, or they can have a device. And in this case, with the locator, students are allowed to use an iPad. The iPads do not work on subject testing, so they will not work with a reading, math, or language testing, but an iPad will work on the locator. The technology or the device that they're using does not need to have Google Chrome installed. And then in the next step with that, one of the other requirements, there's called an online tools training that DRC indicated that a student needs to have access to that document. But on that main page that was in the initial part of this presentation for the TABE section, there is a document called this TABE Student Instructions for Locator Testing. And this PowerPoint is a link to that document, but that document will provide all of the steps that a student needs to take to verify that their device can handle the remote testing capability and meet all of the tech requirements. So if a student has any tech issues while they're completing that online tools training, they do need to contact their TABE test administrator and advise them of what the problems were. Next slide, please. Okay. So the technology that the proctor needs to have in order to do any remote testing. There's a link in here as well as the minimum browser requirements. Some specifics on that would include you have to have Microsoft Explorer 11, Chrome 52 or higher, Firefox 47, Apple Safari 9, Microsoft Edge. I mean, there's a lot of different browsers that you can use, but one of the things that DRC is recommending that you have a minimum browser window of at least 1024 pixels so that your screen resolution is 1024 by 768 so that it's maximized. Because if it doesn't meet those maximized requirements, then there will need to be scrolling and horizontal to increase the functionality with that. There's PC users can have access to this. So if a proctor has a PC, they can access it through a Mac, Linux, and so forth. But they do need to have a webcam. They do need to have a microphone and speakers, and they again need to have reliable internet speed. Next slide, please. Okay, so for a student remote testing, the technology that's required for them is they need to have, again, a laptop or a desktop computer with Chrome browser installed. They need to have and make sure that they have the minimum browser window width of 1024 pixels. They need to have access to a webcam, and they need to have access to a microphone and speakers. And again, they need to have reliable internet speed. Next slide, please. And with the web conferencing options, DRC has advised the field that any web conferencing options they choose, they have to make sure that they meet the DRC guidelines for remote testing. And that guidance is found in the examiner instructions for remote testing document that is out on the tabetest.com site. There are many items that they recommend that include all the different functionalities, including recording, including breakout private sessions with private chat and screen sharing capabilities, as well as screen sharing by participants and the ability to have private chat rooms. And they need to be able to have a meeting login information embedded in the link that is sent to them. These are the items that are up here are several of the suggested platforms to use, but if your agency intends on using Zoom, you need to make sure that you have the paid version so that it allows for the longer sessions, because a standard Zoom session, I believe, is 40 minutes. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I believe that that is the case. Next slide, please. Okay, the day before testing day, there is going to be upfront work with the test administrator with the learner. They're going to meet with the test taker to confirm that they meet the tech requirements for the testing. They're going to go over all of the different test procedures. They're going to answer any of their questions to make sure that the test taker is comfortable with the process. And these were many of the same things that we did with learners prior COVID. So just remember that those are the same reassurances that we just need to make sure. But there's a couple extra things added on there with the tech requirements. So we need to verify that the test taker's ID has been verified, and they do that with their webcam. They need to visually show you that their ID, and then we need to familiarize the test takers with the environment using sample test items as well. Next slide, please. And prior to testing day, local staff will need to set up a test session in their DRC portal account. They will need to create a student record for each test taker. And in order to create a student record, there's very limited information required to create an individual record. It's last name, first name, date of birth, gender, and then you need to choose whichever building is associated with where the student plans to test within your version of the portal for DRC. So, and then each student that will be in your test session, you will need to schedule them into the test session, because in order to get the test ticket that is created by the Insight platform, there's an individual username and password that are created for each individual. So, and that information will need to be shared with the learner prior to them being administered the test. Next slide, please. And as Marty elaborated on this earlier, and DRC encouraged this as well, proctors are really strongly encouraged to do at least one or more, if they can, practice sessions, setting up and administering remote testing with a colleague to work out any tech issues, try out some different platforms, you know, look at the connectivity issues and so forth. And that's really strongly encouraged. And proctors do need to read through and follow the instructions provided at tabetest.com for the examiners. There's 2 different documents. One is called the examiner's instructions for locator testing, and the other document is called the examiner's instruction for remote testing. There is also a frequently asked questions for remote testing that has been posted to the tabetest.com site, but something I do want to point out for those of you who may have attended the remote test training already through DRC, DRC had advised those who were attending that session that documents would be uploaded to the tabetest.com site the week after, and they were. However, they have since updated the documents already once. So the first versions of those documents were dated April 28th, and the second version of those documents was uploaded and it is now dated May 11th. So prior to beginning any testing sessions, my guidance would be to, before you launch this, please go out to the tabetest.com site to make sure that you have the most recent and updated documents that they've provided. So next slide, please. All right, on test taking day, you are again going to make sure that you are identifying what the test takers individually by them showing you their ID. You are going to verify that their surroundings are checked. The proctor has shared by email the test ticket login information with the username and password to each individual test taker who is scheduled into that session, and then the proctor will conduct a live testing session via web conferencing using remote sharing, and the test session needs to be recorded, and that's per DRC guidance. That being said, with it being recorded, if there was an issue with the test session, DRC would be contacting your agency and they would need access to the recording of that session, and so that is their guidance. So, and out on the site with all of the guidance documents that they've also provided, they have currently approved a 1 proctor to 5 student ratio test takers at this time. But again, we are strongly going to encourage, do take the time and practice these sessions with colleagues before launching a live session. Do make sure that you have processes in place for what technology is going to work the best. And then just make sure that you practice before you launch this. Next slide, please. Ooh, there we go. We are to the end, but I haven't been looking at my chat box. I've been focusing on my screen.
Yeah.
Have any questions?
So we've had a couple of comments and questions that Brad and Marty have been answering. Just we'll call those out to make sure that everybody has seen them. The question about whether if students don't have reliable internet access, whether they could take the test in a public site like a library, and Brad chatted in that would be a possibility if they are able to meet all of the testing guidelines and also the Department of Health guidelines. That would be an option once other public sites begin to open out. Then some questions about state support of online test administrations. As Brad chatted, we are able to support some bulk purchasing of online tests if we do have a number of programs that are interested in going in together. So that's something we'll be continuing to explore. When we did our statewide assessment survey back in the late fall, very few programs were interested, but I imagine that things will be shifting quickly around that. And then another question about whether individual programs or consortia can purchase tests. And as Brad chatted, yes, you can work together. Even multiple consortia could work together to purchase testing in bulk, so that it would be more feasible and affordable for the individual programs or consortia. I am not seeing any other TABE specific questions. Have I captured them all, Brad?
Yeah, I believe you did catch them all.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for that information about TABE testing. People can continue to reflect on what Linda has shared. And if you have additional questions regarding TABE remote testing, you can put those in the chat. We'll have, again, a little more question and answer time at the end. At this point, we are going to move into just some discussion around decision points around remote testing.
Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Astrid. And I want to thank Linda and Marty for pulling together these outstanding CASAS and TABE resources and links. Many of these resources are attached as materials, but like Linda and Marty noted, this guidance is developing and changing over time. So we want to make sure that you have the links and are going to the websites for CASAS and TABE both, so that as they change this guidance, you can make sure that you have access to the most up-to-date guidance available. So here are all of the links. You do not need to write all of the links down. One of the materials in the materials tab is the PowerPoint slides. So you can, or the PDF of all the slides, so you can download that and make sure you have access to that. Also note that these materials will be available on mnabe.org afterwards, and the recording will be available as well afterwards. But like Astrid said, we'd really like to turn it over to you now and get you processing. Many of you have been sharing in the chat about what you're processing and thinking about. But the key question is, when would you want to start remote testing? For some students, for all students, which students? So getting remote testing to work takes time. As you heard from Marilyn, from Marty, from Linda. I mean, with the 12-hour restriction lifted, there is a little less pressure for you right now, but this is a perfect time for you to plan. But it does take some time, and you'll need to decide and budget and start that process ideally now. And a couple things that you'll want to use as you think about these decision points are the use. With whom, with when, with what students would you want to plan remote testing? Both now, during school closure periods, but also in the future potentially. And the cost. How can you budget for remote testing? As you saw, Marty and Linda both provided cost, the price of the test, and that is an expense that you do need to budget. Also training. Who needs to be trained for the remote testing so that you can offer it? And I encourage you to think about those key areas: use, cost, training. Maybe you have some other factors that you're thinking of in the logistics. But I encourage you to use the chat or click to raise your hand and really think about the factors that you are weighing in deciding if and when you are going to start remote testing. Astrid, I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, helping me out with some of the comments coming in through the chat, and also if there are any hands up.
Okay, so we did have a question come in from Linda wondering whether public Wi-Fi is secure enough for this testing, in response to a suggestion that C had to have students and proctors perhaps meet in their cars outside of a McDonald's or other public place that has internet access?
It's a good question. I'd like Linda and Marty maybe to chime in, but my initial take on that would be through the remote testing process, like the one-on-one process that Marty was describing, you're actually kind of taking over that person's computer. So I feel like that kind of provides some additional security in that sense. So you could use a public Wi-Fi signal and
That
do
makes sense to me as well.
because of this. Because of that security through the remote proctoring.
Denise is thinking about which students might be appropriate, and she says that students would probably need to have North Star digital literacy skills first. So that might be a criteria they would consider for students doing remote testing. Perhaps they could be placed as conditional work referral and pass all the digital literacy tests first.
I see here Laura talked about her conversation with DRC and the minimum administration that she was told is 135 tests, meaning a total of $499.50, as long as that account is paid up front. Interesting.
Okay.
Linda shared about the public Wi-Fi, that she thinks that public Wi-Fi could be used. She agrees, as long as their device that they plan to take the test on is compatible with the security and the test requirements.
Any others willing to share what you're thinking about when you may start remote testing? And if you'd like to share orally, we can have you raise your hand. We'll unmute you and you can share your thoughts. Teresa's saying one challenge she's feeling is just the bandwidth and contract hours to learn and do so much as a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse, having to specialize in so many areas. That is very true, not just with remote testing, but the huge learning curve that we're all having as we've had to make this quick transition.
I completely agree. I hear that, Teresa. Yep.
Jenny says the biggest barrier for her students is access to consistent, strong Wi-Fi. Access to a non-smartphone device is very limited. About a third of their students are accessing lessons online, mostly from using smartphones. And then the other 2/3 are getting one-on-one instruction over the phone. So she's really saying that it would be challenging for them to do this since they don't have the funds to buy or loan out devices.
Astrid, can I add something?
Please.
Laura did put a question in the chat box about the minimum of 135. But I've got in all the documents that are dated May 11th, new DRC Insight portal accounts require a minimum purchase of 500 online sub-test admins. So did an individual tell you that you could purchase 135 from DRC?
We'll let Laura respond in the chat. In the meantime, Christine's saying it probably wouldn't be necessary for a student to pass all the North Star tests, but specific ones like basic computer and internet basics would be very useful. Kirsten's really struggling to see how low-level students with limited tech access and poor tech skills would be able to do this. They would be investing a lot of time to do remote testing, and that would be a majority of their students fitting into that category of low literacy, low tech skills.
So I'll just chime in, Astrid, saying that Laura did respond where she saw the 135. Laura Malott found that on an online form, and it stated subtests. That's what Laura Malott said about that.
Denise is saying it makes sense for their agency sites to have Wi-Fi so that they can meet at the parking lots if need be. Perhaps they could have a laptop handy too that the student would be able to check out and use for the testing. Jenny's feeling like a more realistic scenario is when the 12-hour limit is put back in place, that they figure out how to test students one at a time at their sites. Penny's asking, does the test proctor have to be employed by the district? Could a proctor work for many different districts?
So the answer to that is the test proctor does not have to be employed by the district. The test proctor could work for many different districts. The test proctor could also be a trained volunteer. It does not have to be someone employed by the district.
Tracy's wondering whether CASAS listening can be used with the lower levels of ESL on Zoom or Meet.
It's a good question. I believe so, but I want to turn it over to Marty to answer that question.
Yes, the CASAS life and work listening is one of the available tests in e-tests, and so therefore for remote testing.
Marilyn is reminding that CASAS has sampler tests, so perhaps for the lower level, it'd be helpful to have a class with 3 or 4 students and try the sample test just to see how it goes. Eric is asking if you could share again the cost for the CASAS e-test.
Okay, it varies, but the lowest number or amount that you can buy is 100, and so 100 to 500 is either 285 or 345, depending upon whether you get basic or enhanced. I know that Maryland suggests the enhanced version because you get more reports for your teachers. So the lowest number then is, as I said, 285 to 345. And then if you want to buy a bunch, you can go up to 5,000 or more, and that's $1.75 or $2.35, I believe. So it varies depending upon the number again.
Thanks, Marty. Julian Alexandria says her initial thoughts will be looking to get computerized CASAS testing in place and then working towards remote testing for all learners down the road.
Excellent. Okay. Well, some good comments in there. And one group of students that that has been noted throughout the session that you may want to consider for computerized or remote testing would be your higher level students, especially those that are that are GED bound, those that want to take the high school equivalency assessments. Though that might be a good group that maybe they want to do most of their work at a distance, even when you're able to do in-person instruction. And that might be a group ongoing that you might want to think about doing computerized or remote testing with in this time, and any of those higher level students, as well as those that are trained in North Star. Excellent discussion. As we're closing out about decision points, one other thing we wanted to note is that you will want to check your emails later today. We are sending information out about a webinar that we're hosting next week that discusses new guidance from the Minnesota Department of Education on summer programming. We're not going to share the details here or answer questions about that guidance here, but we really encourage you to check your emails later today. That email will be coming to Sherry, and that will be going to our all ABE staff and stakeholders list. So everyone that's on our list will get that email. And you can see some of the new guidance that has come up from the Minnesota Department of Education there. And we will talk about it next week on our webinar. So let's close out with any final discussion or questions. Astrid, have any other new questions come in or discussion?
Yes, one from Kirsten, just reflecting that she's feeling like CASAS makes more sense than TABE because it can serve both ESL and ABE clients. And then maybe just a question that Marty could weigh in. She asks, once you pay for X number of licenses, can you select the appropriate test by student, or do you need to purchase X number of tests of CASAS goals level X numbers of CASAS listening work, etc.?
No, you buy web test units and you can apply them however you want to. So you don't have to say, I'm going to give this many life and work tests or this many CASAS goals reading. No, just they all apply to whichever test you choose.
Thanks, Marty. And then just another question about any updates about whether goals has been the goals approval for use with English language learners.
You know,
I have not heard any information. Has anyone
that
else?
question we've been asking for a year now, and there's still no new information. That has still not been approved by the feds. And in fact, I believe that they're resubmitting, Marty, Linda, confirm. I believe that they're resubmitting this fall.
Yep, that's my understanding. They'll be resubmitting in October.
Yep. And so that means they are resubmitting October 1st. And then that will go through another review cycle by the federal government and AIR. So.
Linda mentions that CASAS was in pilot testing this spring prior to COVID and resubmitting in October. Good job.
Excellent. Good question. Unfortunately, you get the same answer that we gave a year ago. Okay. Well, we're running out of time here. So we want to thank you for participating today and just really encourage you. I'm so excited to see so many of you here today virtually. Remind you that the recording, slides, and handouts are posted or will be posted on the MN ABE website in our MN ABE state presentations. We also want you, as you say goodbye today, just chat in with us. Any next steps that you're thinking about for yourself or that you would encourage us to think about. We'd love to hear some suggested next steps as we move into this new era and with this new innovation with remote testing. And again, we'll remind you to check your email. We also will have an evaluation about this webinar to collect some additional insights from you and questions from you at that point. So please take time to complete that evaluation. And Marty, Linda, Astrid, and I will look through those evaluations. Thank you all so much. And we'll continue to take questions and respond to issues in the chat. But thank you all and have a great day.